So this week we begin on Daf Gimel Amidalad of Shir Hashirim and lariach, and we will do the Maimer lariach and then the beginning of Shchera and Ivanava. So lariach Tovim shemen Turak shmecha akain alemos Ehavucha. And so this pasuk means again that the smell, the reach, shmanecha, of your good oil, which smells the good oil, and the oil that pours, your name is like pouring oil that smells well. Okay, and therefore, alemos ehavucha, that the maidens, the ones who are unmarried, love you. In the previous mimer, we learned that alemos, that the ones who are the besulos, the ones who are not married, they are the ones who don't naturally feel a love to Hashem. And therefore comes through avoida. Avoida of, we said, the oisius, etc., as we learned. This mimer is going to be the other way around. That fakert, the tzaddikim, and those who are more ruchni, they're not married. The ones who are married are specifically the ones down here, ba'olam haza, the neshamas down here in this world, doing ma'aseh mitzvahs, doing the actual mitzvahs, as we'll see in a moment. So he begins that the neshamas that are not in the body in olam haza, they're called alemos. They're called the maidens. And he said, "Al tikri alemos alo olamos," meaning, at least as I understand it, that the neshamas that are in the olamas are alemos. Because it says in the pasuk, bועליך עושיך, that the intimacy makes you. In other words, that these are the neshamas that are in this world. And he says, and he brings down from Medrash, and also in Zohar, and I think in those places, one of them, I think it mentions this word bועליך עושיך, but it speaks about ma'aseh mitzvahs, and it speaks about the bechina, the level of eidersin and nisuyin, marriage, that there is for a neshama when doing a mitzvah down here below in this world. So dafka in this world is where we are considered ba'olayich, we're married. We have a yichud pnimi, we have an inner connection. So he says, now the descent of a neshama into this world is a great descent. And not only the time of the Beis HaMikdash, but even, not only the time when there is no Beis HaMikdash, that it's a great descent, but even before the time of Galus, it is still a great exile and a great descent for the neshama to come down and become physical and material within a body in Olam Haza. Because the neshama, as he said before, comes down into this world, is pleasured by the ray and the light of the Shekhinah. And as we say, it's better. It's better to get judged, so to speak, to get punished in Gehenim and come to the world to come. In other words, that the tainug, the pleasure of Gan Eden Atachten, even, and for sure there's even a Gan Eden, top of Gan Eden Atachten is a Gan Eden Elyon. As we know that when a Neshama wants to go from the one Gan Eden to another one, there's another Gehenim which is called Nahar Dinur, which goes out and flows, but it's a river that you have to be toivel in and cleanse oneself to go to a higher one. And we say, even on Gehenim, it says, mutav de ladaini, better to get judged and go through that suffering in order to reach the level of Gan Eden, even Atachten. As he says, I think, in the next mimer, which means that the fact that you have to go through this punishment is worth it, means that this is beyond, the tainug is such a great tainug that all the yisurim is worth it to get to it. So he said, if so, for what reason and why did neshama come down to this world such a great descent? Only it is l'tzarech aliyah. It has to be for an ascent that would reach higher than where it came from. So what is this? It has to be an even higher ascent. So what he says, this is what it says in the Mishnah, That better, one moment of tshuva and good deeds in this world and the whole world to come. Why? He said, because the entire Olam Haba, whether it's Gan Eden, Atachten, and some Mashiach, which he's mentioning here, 3 levels. There's 2 Gan Edens, and there's the Mashiach, I believe. Or it's Olam Haba, Gan Eden, and Mashiach. So that's only Ziv HaShechina. He's saying this is only a ray of the Shechina. It's a little light of the Shechina. As he says that we know that the world was created, the Olam Haba was created with 1 Yud, which Yud denotes and symbolizes the idea of a great tzimtzum, that you take something, you make it into a tiny Yud, 1 thought. And he says, if you would take, for example, 1 letter in comparison to a person's essence, as we see, that we see from our own body, we learn out and we could see godliness in the Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So, in the essence of the Eibishter, it's only 1 thought, so to speak, that he has and encompasses all the worlds and all the generations from beginning to end. As it says, he could have made the whole world with 1 mimer. And as we say, which mimer? Bereshis nami mimerhu. That Bereshis, Bara Elikim, is also one of the 10 utterances. And this resembles, this is the idea of the tzimtzum of the Yud, of 1 ha'ara, 1 light, 1 letter, which encompasses within this 1 letter the whole Chayim Olam Haba, and he says Chaye in a plural term. In other words, there's many levels. And there's levels upon levels in these 3, not only within these 3, but he also explains that there's 50,000 yoivlos, 50,000 sets, we could say it. A yovel is a jubilee, but it means a set of years. As he says that every 6,000 years is only 1 Shemitah. There's 1 group. Now, within a yovel, there's 7 Shemitahs. And each one of them, he says, has within it a Gan Eden Tachton, a Gan Eden Elyon, and Yemaisa Mashiach. And again, every one of these, which is a 6,000 years, 7 of them make up 1 yovel. And then there's 50,000 yovelas. So there's a tremendous amount of Olam Haba. And the Gan Eden Elyon, Gan Eden Tachton. And all of this is the Yud Nivra HaOlam Haba, with 1 Yud. It's all a tzimtzum with 1 machshava. And as we said, this is like 1 thought, 1 letter in comparison to a person's entire existence. The same way, it's by the Eibishter, it's like 1 letter in comparison to the entire everything. The entire Eibishter, so to speak. And if so, the whole Chai Olam Haba is only a ray, 1 ray from the light of the Eibishter, of Mahus and Atzmus, less Machshava, Tisabei, Klav, Mahus of Atzmusay, which we cannot grasp, so to speak, at all in the essence of the Eibishter. So this is what the Yeridah is. This is what the descent is for the sake of an ascent, that through tshuva, one could ascend to such a way that you could become part of the Eibishter himself. And that's why it says, Yafeh Shah Achas. 1 moment, 1 hour in this world is greater than the whole Olam Haba. Because in the whole Olam Haba, you only have a ray, a shine. And the 1 moment of tshuva, you could reach the Eibishter himself. And this is what he says, it's a b'diuk. Yafeh Sha'achas. Because in the exile and descent into a physical body, through tshuva of the depth of one heart, with a susad l'sata, that you arouse yourself from below, when you think about your descent, that you came from such a high place. In other words, and that's what it says in the Mishnah, one should know from where he is coming from. Where are you coming from? The essence of our neshama comes from higher than Chachma. Chachma itself, ma'ayin tamatzeh. It comes from beyond what is revealed. Me'ayin. In other words, therefore, Chachma is the beginning of all revelation. So you have to know where you're coming from, which is that you come, a Yid comes, Yechidah, from beyond Chachma. And where are you going? You're going all the way down to enclose yourself within the physical world. And even a person who didn't sin, even so, he becomes miskashim, he becomes physical, he becomes coarse, and so to speak, separate from the essence and the being of the Eibishter in the most distant way. And therefore a person has to make a calculation to know in his heart and in his soul what his situation is, and then to have rachmanis, to pashat have mercy, meaning to feel bad for his descent, with a broken heart for this life of his neshama, and therefore he'll also have mercy, and he'll feel bad, so to speak, for the entire evolvement to the level of his bana chaya mizayna, to his children and his life and his food, that'll draw it on everything, and therefore that's what we say, Zachreinu l'chaim, remember us for life, that the rachamim that we beg for the neshama also comes down for everything that the neshama is related and connected to. And this is what he says in the pasuk, that with great rachamim I will gather you, which means that through the depth of the tshuva, from the depth of one's heart, when he thinks about haberega koten azavtich, that for one moment the Eibishter, so to speak, abandoned chas v'shalom, so to speak. In other words, that this entire abandonment, that we're in a gullus and we feel separate from the Eibishter, it's only a small moment. It's only one thought. It's only these 6,000 years. And all the 50,000 yovlis. We said before, it's all one thought. So it's all a rega cotton. It's one small little thing in comparison. But if so, his yeridah to the world, this physical world, is a great, great descent. And through that, it's ma'oder tshuva from the depths of one heart, which is rachamim, rabim, from the essence of the Eibishter, to draw down the 13 attributes of mercy that cannot be held in one vessel, only in the 13 midas. Tzemach Tzedek explains here that the Alter Rebbe is basically saying there's two levels of rachamim rabim. There's two levels of Yigilum Rachamim. There's the 13 attributes of mercy before we could even describe them in 13 levels of Yigilum Rachamim. And that's the Rachamim Rabim from the essence of the Eibishter that cannot be held in even one vessel. And so first, because that's the essence of the Eibishter that we reach through tshuva from the depth of one heart. And then when you get this is the Rachamim Rabim, where he says before, Rachamim Gdoilim, the great Rachamim. And then we draw it down into the 13 attributes, where then we have Hashem Kerachum, which this is, the first Hashem is from the Eibishter himself, which is a drawing down from the essence of the Eibishter to come to the next Hashem, which that is the 13 attributes, the 13 midas of Rachamim, and then you have the 13 midas. Gimel. This is what he says, bועליך עושיך, that the intimacy, the connection creates or makes you. So how could this be by the Eibishter, who doesn't have a form of a body, when we're talking about spiritual neshamas, who also don't have any form? How could you say this? Yet it says, aהבוך psula, which is the same meaning again. So he says, that it says this about this in the Gemara, ein isha kereses bris, Ella b'mi shasa kli, right? That the woman does not make a covenant, only with the one who made her into a vessel. And so what does that mean? In other words, that we could only become connected with the Eibishter in this deep way if we become a vessel for the Eibishter. If we become, so to speak, a kli. So he says, how does a kli happen? So we'll see. He said, because through the yeridah into this physical world, in galus, our heart becomes physical and becomes coarse, and it becomes like a stone. And even if one doesn't sin chas v'shalom in an isser, but even when it comes, he did things that were permissible, but he didn't holy himself, and he didn't hold himself back to do it, or he didn't do it right for the purpose of holiness and for the Eibishter. He rather just did it for his own needs. So the neshama and the person, becomes physical, he becomes stuffed, he becomes coarse. And through this through this arousal of great mercy, it arouses from above the 13 midas of Rachamim, and that could open up your heart. In other words, there's a power in those midas to open up the heart of one who is totally stuffed and closed like a basula. As we see in people, that a person who's very angry or miser, or bad person, whose heart is closed, when you bring out by him a certain rachmanis, sometimes his heart gets opened. And that's what it says, bועליך עושיך, that through tshuva from the depths of one heart, when he thinks to himself and this is the end of the pasuk, I believe, that when you think, okay, it says, ba'aliach esayach Hashem tzvokos, I think is the end of that pasuk, that when you think it to Hashem tzvokos, that which means all the units of the Eibishter, it's all the Olam Haba, that you think it's only Shema, you recognize it's only a ray, and only the ray of Hashem is on heaven and earth, of Ziva Shechina, but the source of the neshama is so much higher, and it came down at such a great descent. Through that, you arouse the 13 attributes of mercy, and that with this Rachmim Rabim, it opens up your heart that you could be a vessel and a place that Hashem will rest in. As we say, that not only do we turn to Hashem, but Yor Hashem Panav Eilecha, that Hashem turns His face, and which is kamayim upon Him, like water reflects. One face, and the face that you reflect in water gets reflected. So therefore, we turn our faces to Hashem in tshuva, and this is the idea of this 10 days of tshuva, which is that we return face to face. That a whole year, even though we serve Hashem, it could become like a back. In other words, in the back, there's no inner organs of sight or senses of smell of our face. We don't see the back. It's all equal. It's all sometimes over the year. It becomes a situation that we serve Hashem only with our back, meaning we just serve Hashem gendik because that's what we're doing. But it's not with a pnimius. It's not with a desire. It's not with a investment. It's not with a why. As he says, because the whole chayas of a person, all of his abilities of sight, smell, we said this already, and speech, and etc., is all in the face. And on the backside, it's only an etzem, it's only the bone. So you're doing it a whole year because of your etzem, you're so therefore you're doing Torah mitzvah, but there's no feeling, there's no excitement, so to speak. So what happens? That in the Neseres Tshuva, you turn your face to Hashem through what, as we know, through Rachamim Rabim. And the Eibishter turns his face, Yor Hashem Panav Eilecha, that he turns his face and his pnimius and his desire to you. And so the same way, Kamei Kain, you have to turn your entire inner point of the heart and your entire desire and thought, speech, and action only to the Eibishter himself. As we say, I don't want anything in Shemayim, which is only a one shine and one light. And so before Aseres Simei Tshuva, the whole month of Elul, you arouse these 13 attributes of mercy, which through that, in Aseres Simei Tshuva, we have this return of looking face to face to become one in one with our entire soul, that we become totally infused in the essence of the Eibishter with Rachamim Rabim and Rav Chesed and great kindness. So now in Dalet it says that this is only in neshamas that are in this physical world in a galus and a great descent, and therefore they have what they have Rahmanis for, and therefore they turn around with Trumvad Bum Kedeliba. And as we say, in a place that about Tshuva stands, even the greatest tzaddikim can't stand. But what about the neshamas that are in Gan Eden, which they are the tzaddikim gemurim, they are the complete tzaddikim, that they are only having the hasaga, they're only enjoying and understanding the ray of the Shechin and Olam Haba. So how are they going to ascend to become one within the Eibishter? Because they can't have a broken heart from the depth of their heart mamish. Because they don't have, they weren't so coarse in the first place. And in a sense, you could say that the Alter Rebbe, and I think this is hinted to by the Tzemach Tzedek, I think that the Alter Rebbe is actually saying that even a tzaddik, maybe even in this world, has the same issue. That it's not the same as a Pashat Yid, or a Yid going through a struggle, who Pashat has to have Rachmanis and turn to the Eibishter. So this person, how is he going to? And here comes the Alter Rebbe and says that it's actually, you're going to see in a moment, that this is to the good smell, that from the good smell, the ones who are not married will love you. In other words, meaning that through the Torah that they learned when they were in this physical world, when they were in a body, which we know the Torah came down in physical things, and this is through that Torah they're able to reach and come to the essence of Hashem. And this is what it says, Shemen Turak Shmech, as we said, your name is like poured oil, which we know the entire Torah is names of the Eibishter. And it says, as we pour from one vessel to another. That means that through that which Torah was poured to come down into physical things, and the more it gets poured down like oil, the smell goes higher and higher, as we see with physical oil, that what was on the top, when it gets poured from one vessel, it becomes on the lowest, and it becomes a much stronger smell. It raises, it ascends, the smell ascends. The same way the Torah, that the beginning is in the end, and the end is in the beginning. that Seif Maisa, that the Torah as it is at its lowest level was b'machshava tchila, and therefore through the Torah that they learned, they have the ability to have an aliyah to become within the Eibishter himself. And therefore he says, okay, now lames, he says in a shamas that are not in a guf in Olam Haza, they love you too, which is a Ava Rabba of Rav Chesed, and as he says, and that the level of dew, kital oirais talecha, that it's like a light of dew. That anybody, it says, who uses the light of Torah will give him life. And this is what he says here now. Lariach shmonecha tovim. The word tovim, he says, is from the same term as light. As we find it says, ki tov, that the Eibusha saw the light was good. So he says, so therefore, through tshuva from the depths of the heart, when the neshama is still in this physical world, you're able to ascend and to reach the great love of Hashem. And that's what it says, Yishikenim in a shikas piu, that we said before, that that one wants to kiss the Eibishter, which means to connect with the Eibishter himself in the great love of Pnimius, of face to face. Okay, now the Alter Rebbe continues and says that we find that it says that the words of the Sofrim, of the Chachamim, is greater, sweeter than the wine of Torah. And we say, what is this? These are the 100 brachas that a person makes every single day. Which these brachas, Baruch Atah Hashem, are medivrei Sofrim. Which that is that there should be a revelation and amshacha from one world to another world. That, in other words, that the Eibusha should be a likenu, and not above at a higher level that doesn't reach us down here lemata. In other words, only in seichel and thinking. But no, that itself is a higher world, so to speak, a hidden world. That we want that not only that the eskalos, the revelation of godliness, should be in those world of Torah as it is in seichel, but actually down as it is elikenu, our strength, our koyach. That we have to have the hiskalos, the revelation in the essence of our heart. That we should have one desire to the Eibishter himself. And this we find in every single yid, that he has a hidden love to Hashem, every single yid according to his level, and he could reveal it in his davening. There are those who daven with a cry of the heart, and even though he sees that he is totally a megushim, he's coarse, and he's involved in taivas and in physical midas, but the truth is, you could think, what am I doing? How am I davening? But the truth is that the truth is not this, that you are totally involved in taivas, etc. Because that's only a falsehood from the world of falsehood. That's only the outside, as we'll see in a second. The inside is that you have an ava mesuteres, you have a hidden love that's always there. And this love is the real truth, this ava mesuteres. And that is why the Yidden are called by the term of a nut, an egois, which it says, Elginas egois yiradati, which he says, just like a nut, a walnut, whatever nut, it has within it a moyach, it has within it a fruit that's within the nut. And there's a klippa, there's a shell that covers it on the outside. The same way in the shamas. And the Tzemach Tzedek actually says that a nut could fall into the dirt, and it's not ruined. I got to take off the shell, and then the inner fruit still comes out. So this is like they are while they're still in Olam Haza. And this is the idea of this hidden ava. And that how do you bring it out to revelation is through the idea of Yashas Choshech Sisrei, which is that through going through the level of darkness, and this is what we said before, and even though he hinted to it, the Eibishter saw esa'or ki tov, and what did he do with it? Lignois, he hid it. That means that the good of Torah, or the good that there is, how do you attain it? Through lignois, through hiding it, through the choshech, through the being in galus, as he said, or being in the world in a coarse way, where one thinks everything is dark. Through that rachmanis that you have, you could come to a revelation of this, through that you bring down your lower love. And this is what it says, nichnas yain yatzasoid, that through tshuva you bring out the supernal secret. And this is what it says, Migil Raz Zelabanai, again, as he mentioned this pasuk before, that who revealed this, and this is the idea, this secret is the secret of tshuva, that through tshuva we're able to become one mamish with the Eibishter. As I said before, I think that when he's talking about tzaddikim, part of it, not only is it their Torah that they learn, but actually l'chayr he's also saying that through the people who are doing tshuva ma'umke de liba, through the Torah that these tzaddikim taught, they are also elevated and they get also connected with the essence of the Eibush there, as the regular Yidden who are struggling do. So, 1 second actually. Okay, so we're now going to do the mimer of Shir Nivanava, which is Daled Amud Beis in Shir Hashirim, and we'll do the first two chapters of this mimer. So the pasuk begins Shir Nivanava b'nei Yerushalayim, that I am black but beautiful, daughters of Yerushalayim, and the pasuk continues Ka'ale Kedar, like the tents of Kedar, etc. And then the next pasuk says, the next verse, Al tiruni shani shechar churais, don't see me that I am tanned and dark-skinned, sheshezofasani hashemesh, because I've been tanned by the sun, etc. And so the Alter Rebbe begins the mimer saying that we'll understand this according to what the Rachmim, what our rabbis have said, that the Torah was given in black flame on top of white flame. As explained in Shir Hashirim, Rabbi, he says, on the verse Reishe Kesem Paz, and also in Zer Chelik Gimel, Na'asa Kuflamed Beis Aleph, which there it speaks about the idea that Torah was given a black flame, black fire on white fire. Simple term. Look at a Torah scroll, for example. You will see that the black ink is written on white parchment. So it's black on white. So the same way, it's a black flame on a white flame. We'll see soon why he uses a term flame. He says, now just like it is in the entire Torah that it was given this way, a black flame on a white flame, in other words, that the backdrop is white and the letters are black, so too, what the rabbis have taught us, that with one letter, with the Yud, the entire world to come was created, is also the same idea that it's black flame on top of a white flame. So he says, to understand this, we have to understand the idea that first, that Olam Haba, the world to come, which is the supernal Gan Eden, is a place where the souls have a pleasure from their grasping and understanding of godliness, which is an unbelievable a pleasure without limit and without any type of measurement, without any type of limitations, etc. And that's why it says about Elisha, who's also known as Acher, who was a teacher of Rabbi Meir, who had at one point gone off the ways of Torah, that later on Rabbi Meir davened for him, and he was able to go into Gehenna to get punished and reach the world to come. And it says there, Mutav Diladaini, that it's better that he gets judged and he comes to the world to come. And so that means that it's worth it, which generally a person has Yisurim, he has pain in Gehenna, in purgatory, for 11 months, but for a wicked person it's 12 months. So it's worth those 12 months to be able to get afterwards the pleasure and the spirit of good that there is in the world to come. He said, because this pleasure that there is has no measurement, and there's no way to contain it or to compare it to anything. Because if you were able to compare it, and there was some realm of comparison, in other words, between the pain of Gehenna, you would have to make a calculation and say how much of it is worth, in other words, how much pain is worth the amount of pleasure that you're going to get. And you have to balance it out. But in truth, because it's without any type of limitation, therefore it's not even you can't even calculate it. And therefore it's better to be judged for whatever time it takes in Gehenna, in purgatory, in order to get the pleasure of the world to come. So if that's the case, we have to understand, what is this Yud, this one letter Yud, we say the entire world to come comes from. So what is this Yud from which comes this great pleasure of the world to come? He says, to understand this, we first will understand this as we see the verse, the known statement, Mibsari echza lekal. From my own flesh, I could understand and see godliness. And so in other words, we'll give an example from our own body, our own a person, and through that we'll understand how it is in the godly realms. So that's for an example that we see by a person. And we see clearly that in a physical person, the letters of speech, in other words, the letters through which he makes words and communicates, is through the letters of thought and speech. But when the ideas are still totally in your mind without any thought, there's no letters at all. In other words, let's put a thought that we could give for example. An example is, right now, you're probably seeing the picture that's behind me. So in your realm of thought, there's no letters to it. It's only when you start thinking about it that you start looking at the different aspects and start thinking of each one individually. But as you just have the entire picture in your mind, you don't need letters for it. So it's only when you think or when you speak, in other words, when you start thinking into what you're saying, we're already going further. When you think or you start contemplating, then you give birth to letters with which you contemplate and think the idea. And they get revealed from their hidden state in your mind, in your thoughts, and they come even more revealed when you speak it to somebody else. And these are garments for your intellect. In other words, that your intellect encloses itself like garments in the letters of thought and speech, but they're not the essence and the very being of your soul. Because in the essence, or of your intellect, because in the essence of your intellect, we said, you don't feel there or recognize there any type of communicative letters at that point, or any breakdown of letters. So he says, yet these revelation of letters, even though they're not felt until you say it out in your words, and in the five, as it says, 5 different ways of the mouth. In other words, the letters, they make sounds based on the 5 areas of the mouth that block the air and make sound, whether it's your lips, your teeth, your throat, etc. But even though that's where the sounds and these letters come from, yet that's not where they start. And that's not where their creation from nothing is. And the same thing also, the letters of thought, that they're not created from intellect, that you understand that shines in your thoughts. Only the letters, really the creation of the letters, that which they're able to become letters of thought and speech, are really established already in the very essence of your soul. As we know, a soul is filled with letters. That's really its makeup. It's almost the particles of your soul are letters. And these are powers that allow the soul to be drawn down, that when it comes down lower into whether it is intellect, thought, speech, that the soul, these ideas get painted and framed with these breakdowns of letters and words. Because as he says, in thought, the breakdown of letters happens just as it happens when you speak. And he says this is an example of what it says in the Gemara, that there are 2 spirits, in other words, 2 souls, 2 spirits that we're talking one to the other. Which, what does it mean? That their way of speech and communication is through some type of more refined letter, a more spiritual letter, which is more like our letters of thought. And their thoughts are even more refined. So he's almost saying that even in thought, there's, so to speak, letters that could be communicated if you could only recognize and hear it. He said, but it's concealed. You don't see it. And what he's saying here is that the way these letters are in the soul, he's not saying that it's the essence of the soul, that the soul is letters. What he's saying is that letters are something that come directly from the soul. The soul is a direct source for the letters that are revealed from it. On the other hand, he says the speech, it does reveal to another, what he wants to say. And the source of these letters is much higher than the intellect. In other words, it's coming from the soul itself, the letters. And he says, not that he's saying is that the letters are I said this a second ago, but not that the letters are the essence of the soul and its very being. Because, as he says, the being of the soul is intellect and emotion. And even this, he says, no, in the brackets, it's a source for intellect and emotions. And again, this is what he's saying here is that when you want to really appreciate your soul, let's say, you say you're loving somebody, that's a feeling of the soul. The speaking words that you're saying, you're not going to say that's a soul thing. Yet, both of them are sourced in the soul. your soul expresses itself through letters and expresses itself through its love and fear. So they're both coming from there, yet when we talk about intellect and feelings, it's something that you would attribute more to the soul than letters. Yet, the letters themselves are coming also from the soul. So it's not the soul itself, but it is coming. It is a direct outcome. It's a direct effect of the soul. He says, but rather the soul itself is made up from many powers, which are these letters, that it could come down into thought in a way that it spreads its light, so to speak. It's in other words, it's almost like a luminary and a light. The light spreads. It spreads through these letters, which originate from there, even though you don't see it there within the soul. And this is what he says is that the Torah, and this is the Kitzur, the abridged version here, is that the Torah was given on black fire, on white fire, and the same way the Yud with which the world to come was created is also a black fire on a white fire. And so he explains first what is the idea of letters, of thought and speech, that they are only garments to the soul and to the intellect. Yet, he says the source of the letters are in the soul itself. So he says now, as this entire example is also above in the light of the Ein Sof, because the revelation and that which a neshama grasps in godliness and its pleasure in God, even though it's an unbelievable pleasure, yet it's only letters, meaning it's only a revelation from God. It's not God himself. And you could see here, he says, as we see, and he brings it from the Maimer, that Malchus Atzilus, the 10th sphere of Malchus of the world of Atzilus, which is generally considered the letters of speech, they become a crown, an attic, to the lower world, the world under it, which is Bria, which that is the source and the place of the higher Gan Eden. So you see this idea as well. The idea of letters is what brings about the pleasure of the soul's understanding godliness and grasping godliness. And so this is what he says. Gan Eden Elyon, the higher supernal Gan Eden, which we just said is in the world of Bria, is the letters of thought. And Gan Eden Atachton, the lower Gan Eden, is more considered as similar to the world of letters of speech. And this is what it says in the verse, that I've created, etc. And the verse says, Barasiv Yitzartiv Afasisiv, that I created, I formed, I even made. So Barasiv, the world of formation, that goes in the level of thought, which is Gan Eden Elyon, the higher Gan Eden, which is in the world of Bria. Then we have Yitzartiv, the world of formation, I formed, that's the idea, the level of speech, which is the lower Gan Eden, which is in the world of Yetzirah and formation. And then Afasisiv, I've also made, that reflects, that corresponds to the world of action, this physical world. Now in the brackets he says, that in the Maimer Mimana, he says the word af, and, or even, I even created, is it gives a lesson to add something here. It's being marbeh something. And what is that? A fourth level, which is higher than thought and speech and action, which that is, unlike that the other three are garments for the light of the Ein Sof, but rather this is the desire, the supernal desire itself, which is the Ein Sof itself, in its glory and its essence, which this gets drawn down through the fulfillment of mitzvahs in this physical world. And so the same way he says, we'll say when he says Gan Eden Elyon, the higher Gan Eden, that the revelation is from the levels of thought, and the lower Gan Eden is from the letters of speech, that's the way they're just created on its own. But through fulfilling mitzvahs down here in this world, we bring new and additional light within Gan Eden. And what is that additional light that we bring? Is that we reveal that it includes within those things now the supernal desire and the supernal wisdom in the thought and speech, as it says, that very much is deep your thoughts, meaning there's a depth in this thought. And so in simple words, this means that the world of Atzilus itself is going to be the level of Chachmaseh, at least as he's explaining here, is the wisdom of God. The wisdom of God is the source for the speech and the thought. But then there's a desire that, why does God want this? What is the inner meaning, the inner reason behind it? And this is when we have a thought. Sometimes a thought or a speech can be very mundane. There's no meaning in it. You don't understand the meaning. You don't appreciate the meaning. To appreciate the meaning of the divine is that is a desire of the divine. The desire of the divine is when you put on tefillin, you do a mitzvah down here physically in this world, you've then done the exact desire as God wanted it, and that brings about that desire and that meaning and that purpose and that essence of why the creation and why the mitzvah and why you and everything else gets revealed now in thought and in speech in the higher and lower Gan Edens. This is similar to what we said in today's Shir in the previous mimer of Lariach about how those who are in the Garden of Eden get a pleasure from God himself when they don't actually have the ability to do Torah mitzvahs down here. And he says here, this is also what other Marishim, the first man was put into Gan Eden to work it and to guard it, means to add something here, and that's done through Torah mitzvahs. He says this also is what it says that with the Yud, the world to come was created, but this physical world was created with a Hey. And as we know, there's a level of Hey that is higher than the level of the Yud. The Yud is from the Chachma, the wisdom of God, as it says in Lech Lecha, by the way, the Hey Avraham. And this Hey comes from Atik, it comes from a higher level, reflecting the pleasure and desire of God, which revealed specifically down here in this world when we do mitzvahs. And therefore, through tshuva and good deeds in this world, we're able to add even additional light in Gan Eden. And he says now he'll go back to explaining about the letters of thought and speech. He says these letters of thought and speech, or the worlds of Bria and Yetzirah, they are only garments to the light of the Ein Sof. As it says in the Tikkun Zohar, garments you have prepared, you have made for it, that from there the souls fly down to man. So, but the light of Ein Sof itself, in its essence, in its glory, there can't be any type of revelation, because there's no thought that could grasp God at all. And as we say that you're wise, but not a known wisdom, not one that we could comprehend. Or as it says, you're the knower, you're the knowledge, and you're the known. And as the Rambam continues, and an ear cannot hear this, and a heart cannot comprehend this. This is something beyond comprehension, which means that this is something of God himself. It's black, it's dark to us. And that's what it says about this, Yashas Choshech Sisrei, that God conceals himself, so to speak, in the darkness. That, in other words, what does it mean, darkness? Something that we don't have a grasp in, something we don't understand, we have no understanding in. And so that is the way, that what it is revealed to us is a letter. A letter is a revelation. The Yud is all that it needs to give the entire revelation of all the spiritual worlds, and the Hey, the lower worlds. And they come through garments of speech and thought. Just like in us, the revelation of our mind, the revelation of everything we have is through speech and thought that we have. But God himself is dark, is something that is dark to us. And that is beyond what we comprehend. Now the Alter Rebbe says that all this is the way things are in the view from below to above. What's going on? And in this way, we say that what's above our the ability of creations to comprehend is called dark. In other words, that which we don't know, like we say, Yotzer Or Uvari Choshech, he forms light and creates darkness. Now creation is higher than forming. In other words, the darkness is in Bria, the world of creation, which is higher than the revelation that there is in Yetzirah, which is a world of formation. In other words, as we said before, the world of Bria is thought, the world of Yetzirah is speech, and so the level of the higher level is Bari Choshech, is darkness. Why? Because it's less comprehended by us. And as he says here in the Haggah, that like in comparison to the student, and from the student's perspective, the speech of the teacher is called light, it's called revelation, that's what he understands. But the thought of the teacher is dark to him, because he doesn't understand it, he doesn't know it. But when you go from the perspective of the teacher, then the speech is like nothing in comparison to his thought and his knowledge and what he's really going through and thinking. And what he thinks in one moment, the teacher, he could speak many speech, and he could speak for a long time about it. And therefore, the speech by him is called light, and the thought by him is called light, and the speech is called dark, in comparison to his thought. Because it's so much less, it's so much more mundane. So he says even more than that, that we know that in the world of Bria, in the higher world of creation, in other words, the world of Bria, there it shines the level of Chabad Datzilis, which is the levels of intellect, mainly Bina, as we know, Bina Mekanana Bekursaya, and that's called the hidden worlds. And the hidden worlds are, in comparison to the revealed worlds of Atzilus, which are the emotions. And the emotions, they're Mekanana, they get revealed, Zaz Mekanana Biyitzira, in the world of formation. And as we know, on the levels of Chachma and Bina of Atzilus, it says the hidden things, Hanistares la Hashem Elokeinu, the hidden things are for Hashem our God. And therefore, also the angels, which are called the Srafim, which are in the world of Bria, they're called Oimdim Mima'al Loi. They stand above him. But the word Loi could also be Lamed Vav, meaning that they stand higher than the Vav. They stand higher than the Vav. What are the Vav? The Vav are the 6 sides, which are the 6 midas, which are from Atzilus, which they are the ones that reside and nest within the world of Yetzirah. And therefore, those the angels that are in Bria, they don't have as much of an excitement and as much of a outpour of losing themselves, like the Chayas and the Ifanim, which are a lower level of angels, that they're trying to reach with a whole rash, with a whole commotion. Why? Because they're in the world of revelation, and therefore they're trying to get to the higher world. On the other hand, the angels of the higher world, they're quietly, so to speak, rejoicing in this higher realm that they're in. Which is back to the same point that he's saying, that in comparison to the higher world, when we're coming from the perspective of the teacher, the higher world is more comfortable. The lower world is lost, is confused. They're screaming, where, what, when, how do they get? It says that when you say Yotzer Or, when you say the bracha of Yotzer V'Recheshach, that you form light and you create darkness, which we say in the first blessing of the Shema in the morning, you're supposed to touch. When you say Yotzer Or, he forms light, touch your tefillin shel yad, and then when you say, your hand tefillin, and then when you say V'Recheshach, you create darkness, you're supposed to touch your head tefillin. And so we know that the tefillin shel yad, the hand tefillin, are considered like we spoke about this before, like a stamp that is inverted, which means it's a place, it's a vessel within which the lights could reside. On the other hand, the tefillin sharosh, the head tefillin, they are called a protruding stamp, meaning that the light cannot reside within it. Why? Because it's higher than being able to be a vessel to receive light, and therefore, that's why you touch it with b'orei choshech, it's dark. It's not revealed. Why? Because this is not a revealed level to us right now until Mashiach will come. Which from all this is understood that what is revealed to us is called a light, and what's higher than revelation is called darkness. And the same way, everything that's higher in level is called more dark to us because we understand it less. But when you come from the other perspective, which is milamayla lemata, from above to below, it's the other way around. That whatever comes to a greater revelation of that can be comprehended more is more dark in comparison to the light of the Ein Sof of itself. As it says in the Zohar, that the Keser Elyon, the supreme crown, level of Keser, even though that it's a pure light and it's a sparkling light, it is dark in comparison to the cause of all causes. And all are dark before God himself, and everything before God is like nothing. And that's also what is explained, he says in the brackets here, that we say Kikel Deos, that God has, it says, many understandings, right? Many knowledge. Kel Deos, Deos is a plural term for knowledge. He's a God of knowledges, which means there's two knowledges. There's one that comes from bottom, from below to above, which when we see it from that perspective, what is lower is called being, and what is above is called nothing. But the other perspective is that what's above is called the true being. God is the true being, and everything below is the opposite, that it's nothing. And therefore, the Ein Sof, in its own essence and its own glory, which is higher than all type of comprehension, that to God is called true light. That's called the light, which is therefore called the white fire. And what is lower than it? Even the level of Keser is called dark. And this is similar to the idea which we say a candle. In the daytime, what is it worth? And as Rashi says there in the Gemara, that the candle is called dark. It makes dark in comparison to the light of the day. Even though in a comparison to night, the candle is called light. But in comparison to day, it's called dark. Why? Because the day itself is the greatest revelation. It's called light. Something that's a little bit less revealed, a lower level, is called dark. And the same way we say all the prophecies, all the prophets will be nullified when Mashiach will come. And we explain, because the light of the prophecy of the prophets is going to be like nothing in comparison to what the revelation will be, like a candle in the day when Mashiach will come. So for sure, in comparison to the light of Ein Sof, the endless light of God, that in order for it to be drawn down, any little light, any little ray, to be a source of 10 spheres, there has to be an unbelievable contraction. And as we know, the tzimtzum is one that has an empty space made, and only through that there comes a little ray, a little kavechut, a little thread of light that comes through. And so that is considered dark. It's a small little thing in comparison to the true light of God. And therefore, we have this idea that it's black fire on white fire. The black is this little letter, this little kavechut, this little thread of light that is bringing all the light to all the worlds. So now this idea that it's called fire, in other words, there's white fire, there's black fire, but still it's called fire. Why? He says, because look in Atom Nitzavim, in the Gemaimer there, on where it says, Ki Hashem Elokecha eish oichlehu, that God is like a consuming fire. What's the idea of being a consuming fire? A fire specifically? Because water, what is above, comes down below. When I want to talk about something that is contracted, and even in its contracted state, its entire being is still trying to go back to its source and not revealing itself, we call it fire. And that's what we're saying, is that the whole light of God is trying to ascend back to God, and it's actually not what was above comes down exactly below. It's only a little ray that's really trying to go back to above, and we have very little comprehension in it, therefore, because it's concealing from us, we call that fire. Then he says another thing. There's another general idea that there's 4 elements, which are fire, wind, water, and earth, which are connected to the 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And so he says as follows. Fire is a level of Atzilus. It's the highest of all 4, just like the nature of fire is to ascend and to leave the flame and flicker out and just go back to its source. The same way Atzilus is beyond all the other 3 worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, because those are already created worlds. On the other hand, Atzilus is godly, and godly wants to return back to God, to its perfect state. And so in Atzilus itself, there's also 4 worlds, because the Keser, the crown, or the Chachma Ilah of Atzilus is called the Atzilus of Atzilus. Bina, understanding, is called the Bria, the world of Bria, of creation of Atzilus. And Zah Malchus, the 2 lower levels, are called the Yetzira and Asiya of Atzilus. And in general, there's even more than this. There's also called an Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which are the general ones. And in this, it divides the worlds in a different way, that all the worlds from Atzilus and lower are called Asiya, and then you have Atik, Arich, and you have the 2 worlds of Keser, which are higher, and then you have Malchus, you have the Ein Sof itself, which is called Atzilus. But no matter what, Atzilus then, the highest level is called fire. Yet, even this highest level is considered to be called black fire, in comparison to the emanator of the Ein Sof, which is called the white fire. And he said also in general, Zah, in comparison to Atik, is called black fire in comparison to white fire. So that's generally this idea of black fire on white fire, is this idea that it's fire, even the highest level, the very essence of all revelation. The first level of Atzilus is only the level of fire, and it's called black fire. It's only a black darkness in comparison to the actual light of God. But he says, because the worlds are not able to accept, and no mind can grasp God himself, or Besar said, cannot grasp even this new level of light that's being created from God, Therefore it says that Vayar Likim, in preparation, it says God saw the light, that it was good, and we say it was good to be hidden. That means that the light, we know the word Tov also means light. That how was it hidden? It was hidden in the realms of darkness. As we say, God is his place is in darkness. And this is what we say, which is that God contracts and he conceals the light in many different contractions and veils that separate and conceal the light, that it should be able to be revealed down here in a way that we could have the heavenly, the higher Gan Eden, which is the pleasure of neshamas, and that they could have an understanding of God and creation and the worlds of creation, the worlds of emanation, etc. That all this is through the contractions of the black letters, we're able to have, so to speak, a revelation down here on earth. And that's where it says that with God's good, and I skipped this little bracket here, it's his goodness. He recreates the world every day, all acts of creation, meaning that with his good, that's what he saw that it was good to conceal the light. From that, we're able to have a renewal of creation, that we can become something from nothing at every moment and have this revelation of these pleasure and understanding in godliness. It comes specifically because through this concealment. In the Kitzer, in the short abbreviated version, he says, of this ice, he says, in the same way above, the revelation of the Or in Gan Eden is only from the level of letters. With a Yud, the world to come was made, which are only garments. But the essence of God, no mind can grasp. On this it says that it has to come through, that his place is in the darkness. And that is the way we look at it from below, which we can't grasp, we call darkness. But from above, it's the other way around. And this is what it says, that God found it was good to hide it in the darkness, that the light is revealed specifically through the darkness. That how do we have a revelation in Gan Eden, or even down here in this world? It's through this kindness that he renews, through this darkness, that we have some type of revelation here on earth. And the Mimer will continue in next week.